Now, there may be a lot of things in this box. For example, today is Super Bowl Sunday. I'm not hosting this year, but I have hosted Super Bowl parties in the past. And if I were to be going out to get supplies for the game, my box labeled Get Super Bowl Supplies would have things in it like go to the grocery store to get some chips, get wings in both barbecue and spicy, pick up some beers. Pop would be good, but you might want to go to the liquor store, get some mixer. Oh, by the way, go get peanuts and some other little nibbles from the bulk barn, and so on and so on. Things go into the box to get Super Bowl supplies. Now, if Kathy were to ask me on my way out the door, could you get some milk while you're at the grocery store? That might not make it into the box. Because you see, is milk necessarily a Super Bowl supply? That's how men's brains are like waffles. They're little boxes all separate from one another, and if you add something to that box, you have to put it into context. Get milk may not make it in, but get milk because milkshakes go well with Super Bowl food, that puts it in the context, and it might well make it into the box. Women's brains, on the other hand, are considered to be like plates of spaghetti, where every noodle may well be an independent entity, but it's touching every other noodle next to it, and it's twined around everything else in the bowl so that it's connected with everything else. And when you cover it with sauce, well, then everything has the possibility of being in context. Women's brains connect together an awful lot, and they figure out a lot of things in the midst of everything else. So if your wife proposes to go out and get the Super Bowl supplies, she will probably come back with everything you asked her to get. A few things that you didn't ask her to get, which are really neat, plus the milk, plus the eggs, plus the toilet paper that you forgot to get last week when you went out to get a driver bit for your drill so that you could fix something in your shop. And that's the way women's brains tend to work. And she will probably remember next year when it comes time to do this again. Now, as I say, this is a generalization. It's not meant to impugn the intelligence of men or women, to say that one gender is necessarily brighter or smarter than the other. The point of the book is that our brains tend to work differently. And if we think that our partner thinks not the same things we do, but the same way we do, then we're in for disappointment. We don't marry our clone. We married our partner. We married our complement, who fills in the gaps, who fills in our weak places, and whose weak places we in turn seek to fill up in our own way. This isn't to say those differences won't annoy us from time to time. Well, that's starting to get off into other topics and other sermons. But getting back to point here today, these boxes are going to be used to symbolize that I hear whenever I read this passage of Scripture from Paul from 1 Corinthians chapter 9. You see, Paul is talking about context for faith, and in matters of faith. Context has as one definition the set of circumstances or facts that surround a particular event, situation, etc. Nothing happens in isolation. John Donne once famously said, "No man is an island entirely unto itself," meaning that everyone and everything is interconnected to everything around it in one way or another. Edward Lawrence, an American mathematician and meteorologist, famously coined the phrase, the butterfly effect, meaning that something small and seemingly inconsequential, such as a butterfly flapping its wings, but when that thing happens at just the right time, in just the right place, it can have much larger effects and ramifications and impacts down the chain. For Lawrence, that theoretical butterfly flapping its wings could cause a hurricane or a tornado weeks later. For Paul, how a person believes and the details of what they believe could determine whether or not they stay faithful to Christ or wander off the track. In the chapter before, in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, where Paul is talking about meat sacrificed to an idol, to him, that meat is just meat. Cut from an animal that just happened to be standing in front of a block of wood or a chunk of stone that represents a god that is, well, not a god. But if someone in the newly founded Corinthian church had been a worshiper of that god, and somehow might get it into their heads that meat sacrificed in front of that idol somehow makes that meat more special than the meat you get from a vendor on the street. And if Paul's request for meat with a meal made that person jump through hoops to get the best meat possible for Paul, well, it might lead them back to that God rather than staying in favor of Christ. He says, well, that's making them stumble. And if meat is a thing that has a context that does not edify and build up a believer, Paul's attitude is, feed me veggies. Feed me vegetables, keep your body, keep your mind, keep your heart out of that place you don't need to go, where I won't make you go to satisfy myself. Paul gets the idea of context. He gets the idea of boxes because he's a guy. Chapter 9, what we heard him say is, I've been called to preach the gospel, but I've got boxes for my methods and my messages based on my experiences, based on who I was and who I am now. Come to me as a Jew. I was born a Jew. I will speak to you out of the context of my having been a Jew and explain to you how Messiah applies to you as well. Come to me as one under the law. I was a Pharisee. Here's my Pharisee box. Let me talk to you about what it is to live under the law of Moses and now to submit to the law of Christ. Not under the law? Hey, I've got a box for that too. Many of my friends were pagan worshipers. I call them brothers and sisters in Christ. Now, let me speak to you of them and their experiences and my experiences with them, and come to Christ with me. Now, Paul says something to wrap that up that I dispute on a details level. He says in the second half of verse 22, I've become all things to all people so that I might by all means save some. This picture is of wife and mother and how she tries to be all things to all people, and that's just in her family. Well, it's hyperbole. It's hyperbole when Paul says it, and it's hyperbole when we say that this woman is trying to be all things to all people, because Paul, yes, has many experiences, making him capable of talking to many people. But he hasn't dealt with all things. He has a very broad audience, but he has not dealt with all things. No one person can have dealt with all of the woes and challenges and struggles and triumphs of life. But there are people out there who have different boxes than those around them. There are those of us who have had different problems and we've come through them somehow. Or we simply have different life experiences, positive or negative. And when you're facing those moments, do you want to go to someone for help who knows nothing about that experience? Or would you rather talk to someone who's been there? This is what I think is the greatest failing of the celibacy of priests in the Roman Catholic tradition. How can they give marital advice when they've never been married? How can they give child-rearing advice when they've never had children? Now, some of them realize this. Some of them realize that they don't have that box. A colleague of mine went to a couple, again, friends of mine. You get a network of people that you know. And he asked this couple, could you lead the marriage prep course at our church? I had known Dom and Nancy for several years by that time. Dom was a nut. Dom was one of the funniest guys you would ever meet. He didn't take very much serious, or didn't seem to take very much serious. But he and his wife had been married for 35 years. They had raised 3 wonderful children. And the priest went to them and said, could you lead the marriage prep course this spring? And so Dom and Nancy led that course. And I'm sure that everybody who came to that course had an absolute blast. And I hope that they took something that Dom and Nancy were offering them, and that the guys put them in their boxes and the girls put them on their plates of spaghetti. Because we all have things that we can draw on to help others, to work with others, to offer to others when they find themselves in the places that we have been. And it's amazing how some of the most hellish things that we can go through can be brought back to help us help others, if we'll let them. I knew a woman who was horribly abused as a child. And as she got older in life, she was sent to a counselor. She had gotten to the age that her mother had been when she remembered the abuse starting, when she had her most vivid memories. And she went to the counselor and she laid out her story. Now, she had told me this story. She had told me all the details. And my basic reaction was, I'd never experienced anything like that. I had no background in anything like that. Yes, she could talk to me about it if that would help her unlimber, but I had nothing in common to offer back. And she expected that reaction from the counselor. Oh, sure, this counselor is just going to tell me all about things she's never dealt with. And the counselor had had a similar childhood experience. And as the counselor laid out her own story to establish rapport with my friend said to her, how is it you're on the other side of that desk and not over here with me? And the counselor said, I found a way. And I'm here to help you find a similar way. I couldn't help her, but this woman could, because she had the context. And context is critical. And therein lies the miracle of Jesus. And I keep saying this, and in different ways, and I'm going to keep saying it in different ways. God sent His Son down among us to experience the things that we experience. To live life on this side of heaven, with all of its pluses and all of its minuses. And God didn't set Him in the palace with the context of wealth and privilege. He put Him in a nowhere village, surrounded by people who were poor and needful. He saw the sick. He saw the broken. He saw the faithful and He saw the lost. And with everyone He saw and with everyone He touched, Jesus entered into that moment and was, for that moment, utterly and completely with that person and their needs. Now, God the Son had to move on from each encounter, but the assurance that He later gave us is that God the Spirit never does and never will. God the Spirit is with us every moment of every day. Nothing hidden, nothing secret. And if we reach out to it and accept that Spirit and let that Spirit flow and move within us and through us, it gives us what we need every day, our daily bread. Because it knows our context, and it knows better than we ourselves know what is in our hearts, what is in our souls, and what we are and what we can do, and what we can yet become. In closing for this morning, there's a scene near the end of The Princess Bride. How many of you have seen The Princess Bride? Oh, we got a few hands. Our three heroes are planning to storm the castle. And the question is, what are our assets? Well, the guy in the middle is the planner. We have his brain. The gentleman in the front is the swordsman. We have his steel. And the giant, we have his strength. Those are all our assets. The planner says, oh, but if only we had one of these things. And he's told, oh, wait, we have one of those. Well, how about this other thing? Yeah, we happen to have one of those too. Put a couple more things into that box, and they had themselves a plan. What they'd been lacking was a context for those items, a way for those items to come together and be useful. And that's my prayer for you today, the prayer for all of us today. That we all start to realize, if we haven't already, the things that you do have and how they might be useful in whatever ministry or place or moment God may want to have you working with at this particular point and time in your life. You may think it's nothing. You may think it's horrible and you just want to bury it. But God can take the worst thing in our lives and make it a great thing for someone who really needs it, whether it's us or someone else. We just have to give it to Him and let Him put it in context, in the context that it really needs. Amen.